There's no place for you here anymore, Kelsey. My daughter-in-law said it loudly enough for the entire Christmas table to go silent. I stood there holding a plate of homemade pecan pie while snow fell softly outside my son's beautiful Ohio home. 20 years earlier, I had buried my husband and worked 2 jobs to give Ryan a future. But that night, my own son lowered his eyes and said nothing while his wife humiliated me in front of strangers. So I picked up my old coat and walked out into the freezing Christmas night. What none of them knew was this. The next morning, my son would call me crying, and by then Vanessa's perfect little world had already started collapsing. If you've ever felt unwanted by the very people you sacrificed everything for, I want you to stay with me until the end of the story. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? Don't forget to like and subscribe if stories about family betrayal and second chances speak to your heart. I still remember how carefully I wrapped the pecan pie that Christmas Eve. It had been Ethan's favorite recipe. Every December, my late husband used to stand beside me in our tiny kitchen, humming old Frank Sinatra songs while stealing pieces of pecan from the bowl when he thought I wasn't looking. Even after losing him 12 years earlier, I still made that pie every Christmas. Some traditions are the only way widows keep love alive. The roads in Columbus were covered in fresh snow that evening. The streetlights glowed gold against the white sidewalks, and for a moment driving through those quiet suburban neighborhoods almost made me feel peaceful. Almost. I remember checking my lipstick in the rearview mirror before getting out of the car. At 68, I no longer cared about looking glamorous, but I still wanted to look presentable for my son. Ryan used to notice those things. When he was little, he would tell me I looked beautiful even in my grocery store uniform after double shifts. Back then, he looked at me like I hung the moon. Now, I wasn't so sure he really saw me anymore. I carried the pie carefully up the icy walkway to Ryan and Vanessa's house. The place looked like something from a Christmas movie. Giant wreaths hung from every window. White lights wrapped around the columns. Expensive SUVs lined the driveway. The house itself still startled me sometimes. 3 years earlier, Ryan had nearly lost everything after his business failed. He had been drowning in debt and too ashamed to tell anyone how bad things really were. I remembered sitting across from him at my small dining table while he cried into his hands like a little boy again. "I'm going to lose the house before I even buy one, Mom," he'd whispered back then. That memory still lived inside me. I rang the bell and forced myself to smile. Vanessa opened the door wearing an elegant emerald green dress and diamonds around her neck that sparkled under the chandelier light. "Oh," she said flatly, "you made it. Not Merry Christmas. Not, you look lovely. Just, you made it." The warmth behind her smile never reached her eyes. I stepped inside anyway, carrying the pie carefully. Traffic was slower because of the snow. I said gently, "I brought dessert." Vanessa glanced down at the pie like it was a grocery bag someone forgot on the porch. "We already have desserts from Delacroix Bakery," she replied. "But you can leave it over there." "Over there." "Not in the kitchen, not on the table." She pointed toward a side counter near the laundry room. I stood there for half a second longer than I should have. Tiny humiliations. That's how disrespect begins in families. Not with screaming, not at first. It starts with small moments that quietly tell you where your place is, and where it isn't. I set the pie down carefully and removed my coat. The house was packed with people I barely recognized. Vanessa's friends, business associates, neighbors dressed in expensive cashmere and polished jewelry. Soft jazz music played through hidden speakers while waiters carried trays of champagne through the living room. It didn't feel like family Christmas. It felt like a networking event with ornaments. Ryan finally appeared near the staircase, wearing a charcoal sweater and holding a drink in one hand. "Hey, Mom," he said distractedly before giving me a quick side hug. A side hug? I tried not to let it hurt. "You look tired," I said softly. "Long week," he answered quickly while glancing across the room toward a group of men laughing near the fireplace. Big investors coming after New Year's. Before I could ask another question, someone called his name. "Excuse me 1 second." 1 second turned into nearly 40 minutes. I stood alone near the Christmas tree, pretending to admire ornaments, while guests brushed past me like I was part of the furniture. That was when I started hearing Vanessa. She was near the dining room, talking loudly to 2 women holding wine glasses. "This house was such a project," she said dramatically. "But Ryan and I built everything ourselves from the ground up. Built everything ourselves." I felt something twist quietly inside my chest. One of the women smiled. "Well, it's gorgeous. Your parents must be proud." Vanessa laughed lightly. My father taught me early never to depend on anyone financially. I lowered my eyes slowly. Interesting. Because without my late husband's insurance money, Ryan wouldn't even have qualified for the down payment on this house. But I stayed silent. Older women learn silence the way soldiers learn survival. A few minutes later, I wandered toward the kitchen to help myself to water. That was when I noticed the folders spread across the marble island. Legal documents, mortgage paperwork, bank statements. At first I wasn't paying attention, but then one page shifted slightly beneath the ceiling fan breeze, and I saw my own name. Kelsey Cooper. My fingers froze around the water glass. I leaned slightly closer. The document disappeared instantly. Vanessa rushed across the kitchen faster than I'd seen her move all evening. "Oh, don't worry about those," she said quickly, stacking the papers together. Too quickly. I looked at her calmly. I wasn't worried. Her smile tightened. "They're just business documents." I nodded slowly, but something inside me sharpened, because I recognized enough legal paperwork from my years handling Ethan's medical bills before he died. And I knew one thing immediately. My name should not have been anywhere on those papers. Not after all these years. Not unless something very important was happening behind my back. Vanessa tucked the folders into a leather briefcase. Then she smiled again. But this time the smile looked nervous. And for the first time that night I realized something. Vanessa wasn't uncomfortable because I embarrassed her. Vanessa was uncomfortable because my presence in that house complicated something she was trying very hard to control. I didn't know exactly what yet. But before the night ended I would, and it would change everything between us forever. Dinner started nearly an hour later. By then the house had grown louder from wine and expensive bourbon. The dining room glowed under golden chandelier light, and the long mahogany table looked like something from a magazine spread. Crystal glasses, folded linen napkins, white roses mixed with pine branches running down the center of the table. Beautiful. Cold. I found my place card near the far end of the table beside two strangers I'd never met before. Ryan sat halfway down the table next to Vanessa. Of course. There had been a time when my son used to pull out my chair before I even reached the table. Ethan taught him that. My husband believed little acts of kindness revealed a man's character more than grand speeches ever could. Tonight Ryan barely looked in my direction. I sat quietly and folded my hands in my lap. Vanessa stood at the head of the table holding a wine glass. "I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight," she said smoothly. "It means so much to celebrate Christmas with people who truly support our success and future." Support our success. Again, that wording. Several guests smiled and lifted their glasses. Ryan forced a smile too, though he looked exhausted beneath it. Dinner began with roasted duck sweet potatoes and winter vegetables, arranged so perfectly they barely looked edible. Around me, conversations floated through the room about investment properties, vacation homes in Florida, and private schools. I listened quietly. Older women become invisible at tables like that. People assume silence means ignorance. They stop filtering what they say around you. And sometimes silence lets you hear the truth. About halfway through dinner, one of Vanessa's friends, a blonde woman named Cheryl, laughed while discussing her elderly father moving into assisted living. "It's honestly such a relief," Cheryl said while sipping wine. "I know that sounds terrible, but eventually older parents become too dependent." Several people chuckled awkwardly. Vanessa leaned back in her chair. "Well," she said casually, "boundaries matter. Some parents don't realize their children have their own lives." My stomach tightened slightly. I kept my eyes on my plate. Cheryl laughed again, "Especially when they expect to stay involved forever." Vanessa smirked. "Exactly." The word landed harder than shouting. Ryan shifted uncomfortably beside her. I waited for him to say something, anything. He didn't. Instead, he reached for his whiskey. The conversation moved on, but I could feel something changing in the room. The comments had not been accidental. Vanessa wanted everyone at that table to understand something. She wanted to establish hierarchy, and I was at the bottom of it. I tried focusing on small things instead. The candlelight, the Christmas music playing softly from another room, snow gathering against the windows, anything except the growing humiliation sitting in my chest. Then Cheryl turned toward me suddenly. "So, Kelsey," she asked brightly, "do you live nearby?" Before I could answer, Vanessa spoke first. "She's about 40 minutes away," she said quickly, "though honestly, she spends a lot of time alone." Something about the way she said alone made my skin prickle. I smiled politely. I like my quiet little house. Vanessa tilted her head sympathetically. "Well, some people get stuck in their old ways." The table grew quieter. Ryan stared down at his plate. I looked at my son carefully. Still nothing. I felt something painful unfold inside me, then not anger yet, but grief. There's a specific heartbreak that comes when your child watches someone diminish you and decides keeping the peace matters more than protecting you. That pain cuts deeper than insults. Because strangers owe you nothing. Your children do. Vanessa took another sip of wine. You know, she continued lightly. I think a lot of parents struggle when they can't let go, especially mothers. There it was. No more pretending. One of the older men at the table cleared his throat awkwardly, but Vanessa kept going. Ryan and I have worked really hard to build our own life, she said, and sometimes people have trouble understanding boundaries. I set my fork down quietly. The room felt warmer suddenly, almost suffocating. I spoke gently. I've never wanted to interfere in your life, Vanessa. Her smile tightened. No, because sometimes it feels like you still think Ryan belongs more to you than to his wife. The sentence hit the table like shattered glass. Someone dropped a fork. Ryan finally looked up. Vanessa, he muttered quietly, but there was no strength behind it. No protection, just embarrassment. Vanessa laughed softly and touched his arm. Oh, relax, honey. We're just talking. No, she was performing, and everyone at that table knew it. I could feel eyes sliding toward me with pity now. I hated pity, especially from people who knew nothing about what I had sacrificed for that family. I folded my napkin carefully beside my plate. I should probably head home soon anyway, I said calmly. Vanessa leaned back slowly. Honestly, she replied that might be best. The room went silent, completely silent. Even the music from the other room suddenly seemed far away. Ryan looked stunned now, though not nearly stunned enough. Vanessa, he whispered. But she kept going. This house is crowded enough already, she said with a sharp little laugh. And after tonight, we really need some space. I stared at her. For 1 second, just one, I thought maybe she would stop. Maybe she would realize she had gone too far. Instead, she looked directly into my eyes and said the sentence that would replay in my mind for months afterward. There's no place for you here anymore, Kelsey. Not mom, not family, Kelsey. Like I was some unwanted acquaintance who had overstayed her welcome. My chest tightened so suddenly I thought I might actually collapse. No one moved, no one spoke. I looked at Ryan. I will never forget that moment for the rest of my life. My son lowered his eyes. That hurt more than Vanessa's cruelty ever could, because silence is agreement when someone you love is being humiliated. I stood slowly. My knees felt weak, but my voice stayed calm. Well, I said softly, I suppose I should go then. Vanessa crossed her arms. Ryan still said nothing. Not mom, stay. Not, this is your family too? Nothing. I walked toward the front hallway while the guests stared at me in horrified silence. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my coat. That was when I noticed the leather briefcase sitting partially open on the console table near the stairs. The same one from the kitchen. Something inside me sharpened instantly. Vanessa was still in the dining room arguing quietly with Ryan now. No one was watching me. I stepped closer. Inside the briefcase were several folders. One corner of a document stuck out enough for me to see it clearly. Property transfer authorization, and beneath it, my name, Kelsey Cooper. My heartbeat slowed, not sped up. Slowed. Because suddenly pieces started falling into place. The strange paperwork, Vanessa's nervousness, the cruel performance at dinner. This wasn't just about dislike anymore. This was about something much bigger. Carefully, without making noise, I slid one sealed envelope from the folder into my purse. Then I put the briefcase back exactly as I found it. When I turned toward the dining room one last time, Ryan was finally looking at me. But it was too late. Far too late. I buttoned my coat slowly and opened the front door. Cold winter air rushed against my face, and without another word, I walked out into the falling snow. The snow was falling harder by the time I reached my car. For several minutes, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, while my breath fogged the windshield. Through the glowing windows of Ryan's house, I could still see silhouettes moving around the dining room. The party was continuing, as if I had never been there at all. I thought that would be the moment I cried. But strangely, I didn't. When you reach a certain age, heartbreak changes shape. Young people collapse loudly, older people go quiet. The pain sinks deeper into places tears can't easily reach. I started the engine slowly and pulled away from the curb. Every Christmas light in the neighborhood blurred through the snow like little fading stars. Families were inside drinking cocoa, opening gifts early, laughing over old stories. And I was driving alone on Christmas Eve, at 68 years old, because my own son had let his wife throw me out like an inconvenience. The realization should have made me angry. Instead, it made me tired. Very tired. About 20 minutes later, I stopped at a small roadside motel just outside the city. The neon vacancy sign flickered weakly in the storm, and the parking lot was nearly empty except for an old pickup truck buried under snow. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly like burnt coffee and pine cleaner. The young clerk behind the counter looked startled when he saw me. "You traveling for the holidays?" he asked politely. I forced a small smile. "Something like that." He handed me a room key without asking questions. I appreciated that more than he probably realized. Some kindness comes from knowing when not to pry. My room was tiny, floral bedspread, beige curtains, a television from another decade humming quietly in the corner. I set my purse down carefully and removed my boots. Silence wrapped around me immediately. Not peaceful silence. Lonely silence. For the first time that night, my hands began trembling. I walked to the small window and stared at the snow outside. Then, without warning, Ethan's voice filled my memory so clearly it almost hurt. "You and me against the world, Kels." He used to say that whenever life got difficult. And life had been difficult plenty of times. Especially after he died. I closed my eyes. Suddenly, I was back in that hospital room 12 years earlier, holding Ethan's hand while machines beeped softly around us. Colon cancer had taken him slowly, cruelly. By the end, he weighed barely more than our grandson's golden retriever. But even dying, Ethan worried more about Ryan and me than himself. "Promise me," he whispered one night through cracked lips. "You won't let Ryan drown trying to prove he's strong." At the time, I thought he meant emotionally. Years later, I realized he also meant financially. After Ethan died, I worked constantly. Morning shifts at a pharmacy, evening bookkeeping work, weekend catering jobs, whatever paid bills. Ryan was still trying to establish himself, then desperate to succeed, desperate to become the kind of provider his father had been. I wanted to help him so badly, maybe too badly. I sat down slowly on the edge of the motel bed and opened my purse. The envelope from Vanessa's briefcase was still inside. For a few seconds, I just stared at it. Then I carefully slid the documents out. Legal paperwork, property records, loan agreements. And there it was. My name. Not accidentally, not historically. Currently, Kelsey Cooper, co-owner. I inhaled slowly. 3 years earlier, Ryan had come to me humiliated and terrified after his failed business venture nearly destroyed his credit. Banks refused to approve a mortgage large enough for the kind of home Vanessa wanted, but Ethan's life insurance money still remained mostly untouched in my retirement account. I remembered sitting at my kitchen table while Ryan cried. "Vanessa's going to leave me if I can't fix this," he admitted back then. That sentence alone should have warned me. Love? That depends on money is not love. But he was my son, and mothers will sometimes destroy themselves trying to save their children from pain. So I helped. Quietly. I provided most of the down payment through a legal ownership agreement attorney Claire Bennett had insisted upon. "You need protection too," Kelsey Claire warned me at the time. I almost laughed remembering it now. Protection. From my own family. Back then I trusted Ryan completely. Apparently that had been my mistake. I kept reading. The deeper I looked, the colder my stomach became. Vanessa had been applying for additional financing against the house. Large financing. Far larger than Ryan ever mentioned. There were references to investors, renovation leverage, liquidity restructuring, fancy phrases covering dangerous debt. Then I found something worse. Transfer preparation documents. My pulse slowed again. That same strange calm from earlier returned. Vanessa wasn't just trying to borrow money, she was preparing ownership changes, without discussing any of it with me. I turned another page carefully, and froze. There clipped to the back was a draft transfer authorization form, with a highlighted signature line waiting for me. Not Ryan, me. Suddenly the entire evening rearranged itself inside my head. The fake smiles, the nervousness around the paperwork, the public humiliation. Vanessa hadn't lashed out randomly tonight. She wanted me emotionally weakened, ashamed, eager to leave quietly, easier to manipulate afterward. The realization made my chest ache in a completely different way now, not just from hurt, from betrayal. I leaned back against the motel headboard slowly. How long had this been happening? How many conversations had Ryan and Vanessa shared behind closed doors about me? Had Ryan known everything? Or had he simply become so passive that he stopped asking questions? Outside, snow continued falling heavily beneath the parking lot lights. I rubbed my hands together, suddenly cold. Then another memory surfaced. Ryan at age 9. Standing in our kitchen after Ethan lost his first major contract years before the cancer. "I'll always take care of you and Dad when I grow up," Ryan had promised proudly. Children mean those promises when they make them. Life just teaches some people to forget. I looked back down at the papers, at the highlighted signature line waiting for me. A line Vanessa probably expected me to sign, after enough guilt pressure or emotional exhaustion. Maybe after tonight she assumed I'd become desperate to repair peace with the family. Maybe she thought older women eventually surrender just to avoid loneliness. But sitting there alone in that cheap motel room, something unexpected happened inside me. The grief was still there, the humiliation too, but beneath both, something harder began forming. Clarity. For years, I had been so afraid of losing my relationship with Ryan that I ignored smaller signs of disrespect. I excused Vanessa's behavior. I accepted being sidelined. I convinced myself keeping peace mattered more than protecting my dignity. Tonight shattered that illusion completely. Because a woman who truly loves your son does not need to erase his mother to feel important. And a son who truly values you does not sit silently while you are humiliated. I folded the papers carefully back into the envelope. Then I reached for my phone. 3 missed calls from Ryan, no voicemail, 1 text message. "Mom, please call me." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I turned the phone face down on the nightstand. Not tonight. Tonight, for the first time in many years, Ryan Cooper was going to sit with the consequences of silence. And by morning, his entire world was going to begin unraveling. I woke up Christmas morning to my phone vibrating violently across the motel nightstand. For one confused second, I forgot where I was. Then the ugly floral wallpaper, the stale motel air, and the ache in my chest reminded me. Ryan. The screen lit up again before the ringing even stopped. Ryan calling. I stared at the phone while snow continued falling outside the window. 5 missed calls. Then 6, then 7. Something was wrong. I finally answered on the 8th call. "Mom." Ryan sounded breathless, panicked, not guilty, not ashamed, panicked. I sat up slowly against the headboard. "Good morning to you too." There was silence for half a second. Then he rushed forward all at once. "Mom, where are you? At a motel?" "Oh my God," he exhaled shakily. "Mom, listen. We need to talk. We..." Interesting choice of word. I looked toward the small window where Christmas morning light reflected against thick white snow. "No," I said quietly. "You need to talk." Another silence. Then I heard something in the background. Vanessa. Her voice was sharp, frantic, furious. "Ask her where the documents are." My grip tightened slightly around the phone. Ryan lowered his voice immediately. "Mom, did you take something from the house last night?" There it was. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I'm sorry. Documents." I closed my eyes briefly. "You threw me out on Christmas Eve," I replied calmly. "And this is your first concern. It's not like that." "It feels exactly like that." He inhaled shakily. "Mom, please. This situation is serious." Serious. That word again. Funny how people discover seriousness only when consequences arrive at their own door. I swung my legs slowly off the motel bed and stood up. What situation exactly Ryan I already knew, but I wanted to hear him say it. I heard muffled arguing on his side of the call. Vanessa again. Then Ryan finally spoke. "The financing fell through this morning." I walked slowly toward the motel coffee maker. The financing, yes. For what, another pause? Too long? For the renovation project? I almost laughed. Even now he was still trying to protect her lies. "Ryan," I said softly, "I saw the paperwork." Silence exploded between us. Complete silence. When he finally spoke again, his voice sounded smaller somehow. "You read it. Enough." Another muffled argument in the background. Then Vanessa suddenly grabbed the phone. "Kelsey, this misunderstanding has gotten completely out of control." Her tone had changed overnight. Gone was the cold superiority. Now she sounded nervous. Very nervous. I leaned against the small motel counter. A misunderstanding. "Yes," she rushed on quickly. "The investors are waiting for final signatures this morning. And apparently some paperwork confusion happened with the title structure." Title structure? Such polished language for manipulation. I let her continue. "We were going to explain everything to you after the holidays," she said. After humiliating me in front of your guests, I was emotional last night. No, I replied quietly. You were comfortable. That shut her up. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I heard another voice in the background. A man. Angry. Demanding updates. Investor, I guessed. Vanessa lowered her voice immediately. Kelsey, we really need those documents. Interesting. Need. Not want. Need. I sat slowly at the edge of the motel chair. Why, we explained already? No, I interrupted calmly. You explained nothing. Why do you need my signature? I heard Ryan exhale sharply. Then finally, after all the lies and performances and half-truths, my son broke, because your name is still on the deed. There it was. The truth. Spoken out loud at last. I closed my eyes briefly. Even hearing it didn't shock me anymore. Last night had already prepared me. What exactly were you planning to do with the house, I asked? Ryan hesitated. Vanessa jumped back in quickly. It was just refinancing. I unfolded the documents again on the motel table. No, I said softly while scanning the pages. This says transfer authorization preparation. Silence. Heavy silence. Then Ryan whispered, Oh my God. I could practically hear him reading over her shoulder now, maybe for the first time. Maybe he truly hadn't understood everything she was doing. Or maybe he simply never wanted to know. Vanessa, he said sharply somewhere away from the phone, what is this? Immediately, she started talking fast. It's standard preparation paperwork. Claire said, Who's Claire? Our financial consultant. The lie came too quickly. I looked down at another page. No, I said calmly. Claire Bennett is my attorney. That silence afterward felt enormous. Then Ryan spoke again slower this time. Mom, why is your attorney involved? Because unlike you, your father taught me not to sign documents blindly. But I didn't say that. Instead, I asked the question that mattered most. Ryan, did you know she was trying to remove my ownership from the house? He didn't answer immediately, and sometimes silence tells you everything. Tears burned suddenly behind my eyes, not because of Vanessa this time, but because I realized something heartbreaking. My son had become weak, not evil, weak. Weak enough to let another person rewrite reality while he hid behind exhaustion and avoidance. Weak enough to let his mother become collateral damage in his marriage. Finally, Ryan spoke quietly. I knew there were plans to restructure ownership eventually. Eventually. Such a soft word for betrayal. And were you going to tell me before or after I signed everything away, Mom? No. I interrupted. Answer me. His breathing became shaky again. We were under pressure financially. That sentence explained more than he realized. I stared at the snow outside the window. You lied to everyone about the house, didn't you? No response. You let Vanessa tell people her family paid for it. Still nothing. Ryan. Finally, he whispered I was embarrassed. That hurt in a completely different way. Not anger, not humiliation, heartbreak. Because suddenly I saw the truth clearly. My son wasn't ashamed that I helped him. He was ashamed of needing help at all. And Vanessa had built her entire image around pretending they achieved everything alone. I remembered her words at dinner. We built everything ourselves. No, we built it. Ethan's insurance money, my retirement savings, my years of sacrifice. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being part of the story they wanted to tell the world. I became inconvenient. Too ordinary, too aging, too connected to the truth. Vanessa grabbed the phone again suddenly. Kelsey, listen to me carefully. If this financing collapses, we could lose everything. There it was. Not family, not apology, money. Always money. I spoke very quietly then. Did you know what your husband allowed last night? Kelsey. You looked me in the eyes and said there was no place for me in your home. It was an argument. No, I replied softly. It was honesty. I heard Ryan curse quietly in the background. Then another voice entered the chaos. An unfamiliar male voice. Ryan, the investors are asking for the signed authorization right now. Everything on the other end of the call suddenly became louder and more frantic. And for the first time since Christmas Eve, I felt something dangerous return inside me. Not vengeance, power, because they finally understood something. The woman they dismissed, the woman they humiliated, the older widow they treated like furniture, still legally owned part of the foundation beneath their entire life. Ryan came back on the line, sounding desperate now. Mom, please. Can we meet today? I looked down at the highlighted signature line again. Then I remembered standing alone in falling snow while my son said nothing. "No," I answered calmly. "Mom, you chose silence last night, Ryan. Now you can sit in it for a while too." And before either of them could respond, I ended the call. I spent the rest of Christmas morning sitting in that little motel room with a paper cup of bitter coffee growing cold between my hands. Outside children somewhere nearby were probably opening presents and running into their parents' bedrooms in excitement. Inside Ryan's house, I imagined panic instead of celebration. The thought should have satisfied me. It didn't. Because no matter how much Vanessa had hurt me, Ryan was still my son. And mothers carry a terrible burden even after our children disappoint us. Part of our heart still wants to protect them from pain. That instinct never fully dies. Around noon, my phone rang again. This time it wasn't Ryan. It was Claire Bennett. "Kelsey," my attorney said immediately. "Please tell me you didn't sign anything." I let out a quiet breath. "No." "Good." Her relief sounded genuine. Claire had been my attorney for nearly 15 years. After Ethan died, she helped me organize insurance claims, retirement accounts, and legal protections I barely understood at the time. She also happened to be one of the only people who had warned me about being too generous with Ryan. Not because she disliked him, because she understood human nature. "I'm guessing you've heard from them already," I said. "Oh yes," Claire replied dryly. "Vanessa called my office 3 times this morning, pretending there was some kind of administrative misunderstanding." I almost laughed despite myself. "That sounds like Vanessa." Claire's tone sharpened. "Kelsey, I need you to understand something very clearly. What they attempted here is serious." I looked down at the paperwork spread across the motel bed. "How serious?" "There are multiple transfer preparation documents involving ownership restructuring. Some include references to future authorization under implied consent." A chill slid through me. "Implied consent? Yes," Claire said carefully, "meaning they were building a paper trail, suggesting you had already verbally agreed to surrender partial ownership." I stood up slowly. The motel room suddenly felt smaller. "They were planning this for a while," I whispered. "Yes." The single word landed heavily. I walked toward the window. Snow still covered everything outside in soft white silence, but inside me something darker was beginning to settle. Not shock anymore. Recognition. Because suddenly little moments from the past few years started rearranging themselves differently in my mind. Vanessa insisting on handling financial conversations herself. Ryan becoming vague whenever I asked about the house. Holiday invitations arriving later and later each year. The subtle comments about downsizing and retirement communities. Not random, a progression. Claire interrupted my thoughts gently. "Kelsey, how much did Ryan actually know?" I closed my eyes briefly. That's the question I can't answer. And maybe the most painful part was that I wasn't sure which answer hurt worse. If Ryan knew everything, then he betrayed me. If he didn't, then he had become so passive in his own marriage that he stopped paying attention to what was happening around him. Neither possibility felt good. Claire sighed softly. "You need to come by my office tomorrow morning. Bring every document you took. I will. And Kelsey, yes, do not let guilt cloud your judgment now. Protecting yourself is not cruelty." After we hung up, I stood there quietly for a long time. Protecting yourself is not cruelty. Women from my generation weren't taught that very well. We were taught sacrifice, patience, forgiveness, endurance, especially mothers, especially widows, especially mothers of sons. I thought about all the years after Ethan died. Ryan had only been 30 then, but grief broke him badly, for nearly a year. He came to my house every Sunday just to sit at the kitchen table where his father used to drink coffee. "I don't know how to be a man without Dad here," he admitted once. That sentence nearly destroyed me. So I tried to help him carry everything. Too much, maybe. I sold Ethan's vintage truck when Ryan's first business collapsed. I emptied part of my retirement savings to cover his tax debt. I told myself it was temporary. That family helps family. And honestly, I would probably have done it all again. Because love itself wasn't my mistake. Losing boundaries was. Around 2 in the afternoon, there was another knock at my motel door. For one terrifying second, I thought it might be Vanessa. Instead, it was Ryan. The moment I opened the door, I barely recognized him. His hair was disheveled. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked like a man who hadn't slept at all. "Mom." His voice cracked on the word. I didn't invite him in immediately. He noticed that too. Pain flickered across his face. "I just want to talk." I stepped aside silently. Ryan entered the motel room, slowly looking around at the cheap furniture and faded curtains. Shame spread visibly across his expression. "You stayed here," he whispered. "Yes." The room filled with silence again. Then he looked at me carefully for the first time since Christmas Eve. Not through me, not around me, at me. And suddenly I saw at the exact moment my son realized what he had allowed to happen. His eyes filled instantly. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Mom." I folded my arms gently across my chest. "What did you think happened after I walked out into a snowstorm alone?" Ryan sat down heavily in the chair near the window and covered his face with both hands. I screwed up. The words came out muffled and broken. I didn't answer. Because screwed up sounded painfully small compared to what had actually happened. After a long silence, Ryan looked up again. "She told me the ownership situation was temporary," he admitted quietly. "She said once our finances stabilized, we'd reorganize things properly." I stared at him. "And you believed that I wanted to." There it was. The truth. Weakness often disguises itself as optimism. Ryan continued staring at the floor. "Things haven't been good financially for a while," he admitted. "The business looks successful from outside, but we've been drowning." I said nothing. He laughed bitterly. "You know the worst part? What I was actually relieved when you helped us buy the house. I felt safe for the first time in years." His voice cracked again. "But then Vanessa kept saying we needed to project success. That investors trust confidence. That appearances matter." Appearances? Yes. Vanessa worshipped appearances the way some people worship religion. Ryan rubbed his face tiredly. At first, it was little things. Letting people assume her family contributed more, avoiding conversations about your ownership stake, pretending we handled things independently, and eventually I said quietly, pretending I barely mattered at all. He looked down immediately. "That's not true." "Then why didn't you defend me?" The question hung heavily between us. Ryan opened his mouth twice before finally answering. "Because I knew she'd explode afterward." I stared at him in disbelief. "So you sacrificed me to keep your marriage peaceful?" Tears filled his eyes instantly. "No. Yes." I interrupted softly. "That's exactly what you did." The truth hurt him because it was true. Ryan leaned forward, suddenly desperate now. "Mom, I never wanted this to happen. But it did happen, I know. And you let it." That sentence broke something inside him. I saw it happen right there in front of me. My son began crying quietly at 32 years old, the same way he cried at 9 after Ethan missed one of his baseball games. Only this time, childhood couldn't save him from consequences. "I'm sorry," he whispered repeatedly. "I'm so sorry." And for the first time since Christmas Eve, I finally cried too. Not loudly, just silent tears sliding down my face while I looked at the son I loved more than life itself. The son who had forgotten that love without respect eventually becomes grief. Ryan stayed in that motel room for nearly an hour after we both stopped crying. Neither of us knew what to say anymore. Some wounds become too large for quick apologies. Eventually, he stood slowly and wiped his face with both hands. "I should go," he said quietly. I nodded once, but before he reached the door, I spoke. "Ryan." He turned immediately, almost hopefully. Did Vanessa know she was humiliating the woman who helped pay for that house? The question hit him hard. His shoulders dropped slightly. Yes, he admitted. I closed my eyes briefly. Not because I was shocked anymore, because hearing the truth out loud made it permanent. Ryan looked miserable, she thought. He swallowed hard. She thought if we fully separated finances and ownership from you investors would take us more seriously. I stared at him in disbelief. "So your wife erased me to impress strangers?" "No," he said quickly. "It wasn't supposed to become this ugly, but it already had." That's the thing about disrespect. People always think it will stop just before cruelty. Usually it doesn't. Ryan hesitated near the door. "She wants to meet with you." I laughed softly for the first time in 2 days. A humorless laugh. "Of course she does. She's scared." Good. The thought came faster than I expected. And honestly, I didn't feel guilty for it. Ryan looked down. "She says the gala investors are expecting final confirmation tonight." I frowned slightly. "What gala?" He looked surprised. "You don't know?" No, Ryan rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "Vanessa's been organizing this huge New Year's charity gala downtown. Wealthy donors, business partners, real estate developers." He sighed heavily. "She's been presenting us as some kind of rising power couple." Suddenly pieces clicked together again. The designer clothes, the expensive parties, the obsession with appearances. Vanessa wasn't just chasing wealth. She was chasing status. And status built on lies eventually becomes desperation. She used the house as proof of financial stability, Ryan admitted quietly. How much debt are you actually in? He hesitated too long. Ryan. Almost 600,000. I physically sat back down. The number hit me like ice water. How? Business losses, credit restructuring, loans against future contracts. He shook his head miserably. Vanessa kept saying, once we landed bigger investors, we could recover everything. And the house? He swallowed. She wanted to leverage it further. There it was. The real reason behind everything. Not just greed, panic. Vanessa wasn't simply trying to look rich. She was trying to prevent collapse. And somewhere along the way, I had become the obstacle standing between her and financial survival. Ryan left shortly afterward. Before closing the door behind him, he turned one last time. I really am sorry, Mom. I looked at him carefully. I know. That didn't mean forgiveness had arrived yet. After he left, I sat alone for a while trying to process everything. Then my phone rang again. Vanessa, I considered ignoring it. Instead, I answered. Kelsey, she began immediately, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. Can we please talk like adults? Interesting. Now I was an adult again. Last night, I had simply been unwanted. What do you want, Vanessa? I want to fix this. No, I replied calmly. You want your financing fixed? Silence. Then she sighed dramatically. You're angry. I understand that. Angry. Another minimizing word. Not heartbroken, not betrayed, angry. I'm more disappointed than angry, I said quietly. That seemed to unsettle her more, because anger can be manipulated. Disappointment feels colder. Vanessa lowered her voice. Look, maybe Christmas dinner got out of hand. Maybe. The understatement almost impressed me. You publicly humiliated me. I was stressed. You erased me. Kelsey, you looked me in the eyes and told me there was no place for me in my own son's life. Her breathing sharpened slightly. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean, silence? Long silence. Finally, she spoke again. You've always had too much emotional influence over Ryan. I almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, because it finally sounded honest. There it is, I said softly. What? The truth. Vanessa exhaled hard. You don't understand what it's like trying to build something with a man who still feels responsible for his mother. Responsible. As if love itself were a burden. I walked slowly toward the motel window again. When Ethan died, I said quietly Ryan was drowning emotionally and financially. I helped him because that's what family does. Yes, but eventually children grow up. And eventually decent people learn gratitude. That shut her up immediately. I continued before she could recover. You know what's interesting, Vanessa? What? You never hated my money. Silence again. You only hated me once you no longer wanted to acknowledge where that money came from. Her voice turned sharper now. That's not fair. No, I replied calmly. What happened? Christmas Eve wasn't fair. For a second, I thought she might finally apologize sincerely. Instead, she shifted tactics. Kelsey, if this deal collapses, Ryan could lose everything. There it was again. Ryan. Not herself. She knew exactly which weakness to press. And God help me, it worked for one painful second. Because despite everything, hearing my son might lose his future still hurt. Vanessa sensed the hesitation immediately. He's already under unbelievable pressure, she continued softly. He barely sleeps anymore. He's terrified of failing. My eyes burned suddenly, because I knew that fear in Ryan. He inherited it from Ethan, the constant need to prove himself, to provide, to succeed. But Ethan had never sacrificed family to maintain appearances. That difference mattered. I'm not destroying Ryan, I said quietly. No, Vanessa snapped suddenly, because refusing to cooperate right now absolutely will. There she was again. The real Vanessa. Cold, calculated, blaming. I sat slowly on the motel bed. You still don't understand what you did. I understand perfectly. No, I replied softly, you don't. Silence filled the line. Then I said the one thing she truly didn't expect. I would have helped you. Her breathing stopped. What? If you had come to me honestly, If you had admitted the financial problems, if you had treated me like family instead of an obstacle, my throat tightened painfully. I probably would have helped you anyway, because that was the tragedy of it all. She never needed manipulation. She only needed humility. Vanessa sounded shaken for the first time, Kelsey, but instead I continued quietly. You tried to erase me from the very story I helped build. I heard her inhale sharply. Then she made her final mistake. You're overreacting emotionally. And just like that, every remaining ounce of softness inside me disappeared. Older women know that sentence well. Overreacting, too emotional, too sensitive. Words people use when they want to dismiss pain they caused. I stood slowly. No, I said calmly. I'm finally reacting appropriately. Then I hung up. This time I felt no guilt afterward, only clarity. For years I had mistaken tolerance for peace. But peace built on self-erasure is not peace at all. It's surrender. And for the first time in a very long while, I realized something important. I was done surrendering. The day after Christmas, I walked into Claire Bennett's law office carrying the envelope like it contained explosives. In many ways, it did. Claire's office sat on the third floor of an old brick building downtown, overlooking frozen streets and gray winter skies. The waiting room smelled faintly like coffee and old books, and for the first time in days, I felt oddly safe. Maybe because legal offices deal in facts, not manipulation, not guilt, not emotional rewriting, facts. Claire greeted me personally at the door. The moment she saw my face, her expression softened. Oh, Kelsey, that nearly broke me again. There's something dangerous about kindness when you've spent too long surviving coldness. I hugged her briefly before we moved into her office. You look exhausted, she said gently. I feel exhausted. She motioned toward the chair across from her desk. Let's see exactly what we're dealing with. I handed her the envelope silently. Claire adjusted her glasses and began reviewing the documents one by one. As she read, her expression changed slowly from concern to disbelief. Then anger, real anger. Finally, she set the papers down carefully. How much of this did Ryan know? Not enough, I answered quietly. Or maybe more than he wants to admit. Claire leaned back in her chair. These transfer drafts weren't casual preparations, Kelsey. Someone was actively building toward removing your ownership rights. A cold heaviness settled deeper in my stomach. Can they do that? Not legally? Claire tapped one document sharply. But this worries me. I leaned forward. What is it? This signature notation. She slid the page toward me. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Then I saw it. A digital authorization reference beside my name. I frowned. What does that mean? Claire's eyes hardened. It means someone may have been preparing to electronically process approval documentation in advance. I stared at her. You mean forge my signature? She replied carefully, someone was laying groundwork that could potentially be interpreted as pre-authorized consent. The room suddenly felt colder. I remembered Vanessa's nervousness whenever I got near the paperwork, the highlighted signature lines, the pressure, and suddenly another realization hit me. She expected me to sign after Christmas, I whispered. Claire nodded slowly. Yes. My chest tightened painfully. Not because of the financial betrayal anymore, because I finally understood why Vanessa humiliated me publicly. It wasn't only cruelty, it was strategy. Make me feel unwelcome. Make me emotionally unstable. Make me desperate to repair the relationship. Then present papers during a family reconciliation. Older women are often manipulated through guilt before they are manipulated financially. Claire interrupted my thoughts carefully. Kelsey, has Vanessa ever pressured you before I hesitated? Not directly. But suddenly I remembered dozens of tiny comments over the years. You should simplify your life. That house must be hard for you alone. At your age, stress isn't healthy. At the time, they sounded almost caring. Now I heard them differently. Claire continued reading. Then suddenly she froze. What? She looked up sharply. There's another issue. My stomach dropped. What now? These investor references. She flipped through several pages quickly. This isn't just a refinancing. They were positioning the property for future liquidation. I blinked. Liquidation? Claire looked directly into my eyes. Kelsey, I think Vanessa planned to sell the house. For a second, I genuinely couldn't breathe. Sell it. The home I helped save. The home built partly from Ethan's life insurance money. The home Ryan cried over when he feared losing everything. Vanessa planned to sell it and somehow erase me completely before it happened. I sat back slowly in stunned silence. Claire softened her voice. I'm sorry. But I barely heard her, because suddenly another memory surfaced. 3 months earlier, Vanessa casually asking if I'd ever considered moving closer to retirement communities in Florida. At the time, I thought she was making conversation. Now I realize she may have already been planning my removal from their lives entirely. Claire's office door opened softly then. Ryan walked in. The moment he saw me sitting there, he stopped cold. His face looked even worse than yesterday. Dark circles under his eyes. Wrinkled clothes. The expression of a man whose life was collapsing faster than he could manage. Mom. I didn't answer immediately. Claire folded her hands calmly. Sit down, Ryan. He obeyed instantly. That alone told me everything. The confident businessman persona was gone now. This was just my son again. Scared. Lost. Ashamed. Claire slid several documents toward him. Have you actually read these? Ryan glanced down. At first confusion crossed his face and then horror. His breathing changed immediately. What the hell is this? Claire stayed calm. You tell us. Ryan grabbed another page. No. Vanessa said these were preliminary investor forms. Investor forms involving transfer preparation and future liquidation positioning, Claire replied coldly. Ryan looked physically sick now. She said refinancing would stabilize everything. Did she mention the house being sold? No. The answer came instantly, too instantly to fake. For the first time since Christmas Eve, I truly believed Ryan hadn't known the full extent of Vanessa's plans. Weakness, avoidance, cowardice. Yes, but not full conspiracy. Ryan turned another page, then another. Suddenly his face lost all color. What is this digital authorization? Claire's expression remained hard. That's what I'd like to know. Ryan looked at me slowly. Mom, I swear to God I didn't know about this. I believed him. And somehow that hurt almost as much, because it meant my son had allowed himself to become financially blind inside his own marriage. Ryan buried his face in his hands. Oh my God. Claire leaned forward slightly. Ryan, I need you to answer carefully. Did Vanessa ever discuss removing your mother's ownership after the refinancing? Ryan hesitated, then whispered. She said investors would be uncomfortable with complicated family attachments. Family attachments? I almost laughed at the ugliness of that phrase. Claire continued calmly. And you accepted that Ryan's eyes filled with shame. I thought eventually we'd pay Mom back somehow. Pay me back. As if motherhood were a business loan. I looked away toward the frozen city outside Claire's window. You know what hurts the most? I asked quietly. Ryan looked at me immediately. I never cared about repayment. His face crumpled instantly. I know. No, I replied softly. You know now. Silence settled heavily across the office. Then Claire broke it. There's something else you should both understand. Ryan looked up weakly. What? She tapped the signature notation again. If any unauthorized processing had occurred using Kelsey's identity or implied consent, this could potentially become criminal. Ryan went completely still. Criminal, yes. The words seemed to physically shake him. I watched panic spread across his face, not just financial panic now, real fear. What happens if investors find out? He whispered. Claire answered honestly. They likely will. Ryan looked sick again. Then his voice dropped lower. There's a gala next week. I know, Claire replied. Half the investors from this deal are attending. And Ryan stared at the table helplessly. Vanessa built our entire reputation around this. There it was again. Reputation, image, performance. All built on lies too fragile to survive truth. Ryan suddenly looked at me desperately. Mom, please tell me you don't think I wanted this. I held his gaze for a long moment. I think, I said quietly, you wanted peace so badly that you stopped paying attention to what your silence was costing other people. That truth landed heavily, because deep down, Ryan already knew it. And the worst part, so did I. 3 days after Christmas, I returned to Ryan's house for the first time since Vanessa threw me out. Only this time, I didn't arrive carrying pie. I arrived with attorney Claire Bennett. The irony wasn't lost on me. Snow still lined the sidewalks in uneven gray piles as Claire parked across the street. The house looked exactly the same from the outside, grand polished, glowing with expensive taste, but now I understood something important. Beautiful homes can still contain ugly truths. Claire turned off the engine and looked at me carefully. You don't have to do this today if you're not ready. I stared through the windshield at the giant wreath hanging on the front door. No, I said quietly. I'm ready. What I wasn't ready for was the number of cars parked outside. I frowned. What's going on? Claire checked the text message Ryan had sent earlier. Apparently, Vanessa moved forward with the post-Christmas investor gathering anyway. Of course she did, because people like Vanessa never stop performing until the stage physically collapses beneath them. As we walked toward the front door, I could already hear music and conversation inside. Laughter, champagne glasses, networking voices. For one strange moment, I almost turned around. Not because I was afraid of Vanessa, because part of me still remembered arriving at this same house as Ryan's mother instead of a legal complication. That grief hit unexpectedly hard. Claire touched my arm gently. You okay? I nodded once. Then I rang the bell. The door opened almost immediately. Ryan stood there in a dark blazer looking exhausted beyond words. The moment he saw Claire beside me, tension spread visibly across his face. But something else was there too. Relief. Like maybe he'd finally stopped trying to hold together a collapsing lie by himself. Mom, he said quietly. I noticed he no longer tried to hug me automatically. Good. Respect begins when entitlement ends. Can we come in? Claire asked professionally. Ryan stepped aside immediately. The party inside looked painfully familiar to Christmas Eve. Elegant guests, soft music, expensive wine, carefully curated success. But tonight the atmosphere felt thinner somehow, more strained. People sensed cracks before buildings collapse. Several guests glanced toward us curiously as we entered, and then Vanessa appeared. The moment her eyes landed on Claire, all the color drained from her face. Still beautiful, still polished, still wearing designer heels and a practiced smile, but scared now, very scared. Kelsey, she said carefully approaching us, I'm glad you came. I looked at her calmly. No, you're relieved I came. Her smile twitched slightly. Nearby conversations began slowing as people noticed the tension. Ryan rubbed the back of his neck nervously. Maybe we should talk privately. No, Vanessa interrupted quickly. Interesting. She wanted witnesses. Probably because manipulative people behave differently in public. Claire spoke before I could respond. Actually, a public setting may be useful. Vanessa's eyes sharpened immediately. What exactly is that supposed to mean? Claire removed a folder calmly from her briefcase. It means there are serious legal concerns regarding property representation and ownership disclosures. Several nearby conversations stopped completely. Vanessa forced a laugh. Oh my God, this is ridiculous. Kelsey, are you really turning family tension into legal theater? Family tension? What a delicate phrase for betrayal. I looked around slowly at the watching guests, then back at Vanessa. You told me there was no place for me here, I said quietly. Remember? Her jaw tightened. That was an emotional moment. No, I replied softly. It was an honest one. Ryan closed his eyes briefly beside us. A man near the fireplace approached cautiously then. Mid-50s. Expensive suit. Sharp expression. Everything all right here? He asked. Vanessa answered too quickly. Absolutely. Just a small misunderstanding. Claire stepped forward calmly. Actually, sir, there are unresolved ownership issues involving this property. The man frowned immediately. Ownership issues, those words change rooms instantly. I watched recognition flicker across several guests' faces. Investors, business people, wealthy donors. Exactly the audience Vanessa least wanted hearing this conversation. Kelsey, Vanessa hissed under her breath. What are you doing? I looked directly at her. The truth. And suddenly, for the first time since Christmas Eve, I realized something powerful. I was no longer embarrassed. She was. Claire opened the folder carefully. This property remains partially owned by my client Kelsey Cooper, she announced professionally. There have also been concerning attempts to restructure ownership authorization without proper legal completion. The room went silent. Utterly silent. One woman slowly lowered her champagne glass. Ryan looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Vanessa recovered first. This is absurd, she snapped. Ryan and I own this home. No, Claire corrected calmly. Legally, you do not fully own this home. The silence deepened. Then another voice suddenly entered the conversation. What? Everyone turned. Barbara Hayes stood frozen near the dining room entrance beside her husband Stephen, Vanessa's parents. Barbara looked genuinely confused. What do you mean partially owned? Vanessa's face lost all composure for the first time. Mom, not now. No, Barbara said sharply. Right now. Interesting. Apparently, even her parents didn't know the truth. Stephen stepped forward slowly. Vanessa, you told us you and Ryan bought this house yourselves? There it was. The lie exposed publicly. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Vanessa's breathing became visibly uneven. We did buy it ourselves. Claire calmly slid forward copies of the ownership documents. No, she replied. Kelsey Cooper provided the majority of the original down payment through legally protected co-ownership agreements. Barbara stared at the papers in stunned disbelief. Then she looked at me. You helped pay for this house? I nodded quietly. Ryan finally spoke, then his voice rough with shame. Mom paid for most of it. The confession landed heavily across the room. Vanessa turned toward him in horror. Ryan. No, he interrupted weakly. No more lying. That sentence changed everything. Because suddenly Vanessa stood alone. No united front, no polished image, no husband protecting the performance anymore. Just truth. Raw and ugly beneath expensive lighting. One of the investors near the fireplace cleared his throat awkwardly. So, the refinancing structure we discussed, is that compromised too? Vanessa's face paled instantly. Ryan answered before she could. Yes. The room shifted immediately after that. Subtle. Quiet. But unmistakable. People began stepping emotionally backward from Vanessa. That's the thing about social power built on illusion. Once cracks appear, people retreat quickly to protect themselves. Barbara looked devastated. You lied to us, too. Vanessa's eyes filled suddenly with angry tears. I was trying to protect everything. No, I said quietly. You were trying to control everything. She spun toward me sharply. You think you're innocent here? You've always made Ryan feel weak. The accusation stunned even her own parents. I stared at her calmly. No, I replied softly. I made him feel supported. You made him feel ashamed for needing support. That landed hard. Especially because deep down everyone knew it was true. Ryan looked at the floor. Barbara slowly covered her mouth with one hand. And for the first time since I met Vanessa Cooper, I watched her completely lose control of the narrative she spent years constructing. Not because I screamed, not because I humiliated her, because truth eventually arrived. And truth doesn't need performance, only patience. The investor party ended less than 30 minutes after the truth came out. Not dramatically, quietly. That's how powerful people usually leave uncomfortable situations. No screaming, no scenes, just cold politeness and controlled exits. One by one, guests gathered their coats, offered stiff goodbyes, and disappeared into the snowy Ohio night. The entire time, Vanessa stood frozen near the dining room bar, like someone watching her own life burn down in slow motion. Ryan barely spoke. Neither did I. Some endings don't require more words. By the time Claire left, the house felt hollow. The Christmas decorations still glowed beautifully around us, but now they looked almost sad. Like decorations left behind after a funeral. Claire squeezed my hand gently near the front door. Call me tomorrow, she whispered. And don't make any decisions tonight while emotions are high. I nodded. After she left, silence settled over the house heavily. Barbara and Stephen Hayes remained seated in the living room, looking stunned and exhausted. Vanessa stood by the kitchen island, gripping a wine glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. Ryan stared out the window at the snow, and I stood in the middle of the house I helped build, realizing I no longer felt welcome there at all. That realization hurt more than I expected. Barbara finally spoke first. Kelsey, she said quietly, I didn't know. I looked at her. For the first time, Vanessa's mother didn't appear polished or intimidating. She simply looked like an older woman embarrassed by her daughter's choices. I believe you, I answered softly. Barbara shook her head slowly. She told us you preferred staying financially independent, that you didn't want involvement in the house. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly, another lie exposed. Stephen sighed heavily from the armchair. Jesus Christ, Vanessa, she immediately snapped. Oh, don't start acting morally superior now. Barbara stared at her in disbelief. You forged ahead with financial plans involving Ryan's mother without telling us the truth? I didn't forge anything, Vanessa shot back defensively. The room became very still after that sentence, because none of us missed the specific wording. Not, I didn't lie. Not, Nothing illegal happened, just, I didn't forge anything. Ryan turned slowly from the window. Vanessa, tell me honestly right now. She crossed her arms tightly. Tell you what? Were you planning to process ownership changes without fully explaining them to Mom? Vanessa's silence answered first. Then came anger. I was trying to save us. Her voice cracked sharply through the room. Finally. The real emotion underneath all the performance. Fear. We were drowning financially and nobody understood how bad it was. She exploded. Every month more bills came in, more investors wanted guarantees, more pressure. So you decided humiliating my mother would fix that, Ryan asked hoarsely. Vanessa looked at him desperately now. You were supposed to support me. Ryan laughed bitterly. That's the problem, Vanessa. I supported you so blindly, I stopped seeing what you were becoming. That sentence hit her harder than anything else had all evening. I saw it in her face immediately. Because despite everything, Vanessa still loved Ryan in her own damaged way, and hearing disappointment in his voice shattered something inside her. Tears filled her eyes instantly. I did all this for us. No, Ryan said quietly. You did this for the image of us. Silence. Heavy silence. Barbara wiped her eyes softly. And suddenly I felt exhausted beyond words. Not triumphant. Not victorious. Just tired. Tired of conflict. Tired of manipulation. Tired of being pulled into a battle I never asked for. I picked up my purse from the entry table. I'm leaving. Ryan looked up immediately. Mom, wait. I stopped but didn't turn around. I know saying sorry isn't enough, he said quietly behind me. But please don't walk out thinking none of this mattered to me. I slowly faced him. My son looked broken. Not because of money anymore. Because reality had finally caught up with him. What exactly mattered to you, Ryan? I asked softly. His eyes filled again. You. The answer came instantly. Too late. But honest. I nodded slowly. Then why was I always the easiest person to sacrifice whenever Vanessa became unhappy? That question destroyed him. I saw it happen physically. His shoulders dropped, his breathing faltered, his face crumpled with shame, because deep down, he already knew the answer. I was safe. Children often hurt the parent they trust most, because they assume that love will survive anything. Sometimes it does, but not without scars. Ryan walked closer slowly. When Dad died, you carried everything alone, he whispered. You made life feel stable even when it wasn't. He swallowed hard. I think part of me just started believing you'd always absorb the pain somehow. Tears burned behind my eyes again. Because that was painfully true. I had absorbed pain for years, quietly, consistently, without complaint, until eventually everyone around me forgot I could break too. I looked around the house one last time. The giant Christmas tree, the expensive furniture, the polished kitchen, all of it built partly from Ethan's sacrifice. And suddenly I realized something unexpected. I didn't want any of it anymore. Not like this. Not if ownership required emotional misery. Ryan noticed the shift in my expression immediately. What are you thinking? I took a slow breath. I'm thinking your father would hate what this house turned us into. The words landed hard across the room, especially on Ryan, because Ethan Cooper had been many things in life, but he was never shallow, never obsessed with appearances, never cruel to family for social status. Ryan lowered his eyes. I know. I stepped closer to him gently. Money stress didn't destroy this family, Ryan. He looked up weakly. What did silence? That word lingered between us. Because silence had allowed Vanessa's behavior to grow unchecked for years. Silence had protected lies. Silence had transformed discomfort into humiliation. And silence on Christmas Eve changed everything forever. Ryan wiped his face roughly. I don't know how to fix this. For the first time in days, I answered honestly, neither do I. And maybe that was the beginning of real healing. Not pretending wounds disappear instantly. Not forcing forgiveness too quickly. Just telling the truth. Vanessa suddenly spoke from behind us, her voice smaller now. What happens next? No one answered immediately. Finally, I turned toward her. For the first time since meeting her, she looked genuinely stripped of performance. No perfect smile, no polished confidence, just a frightened woman standing in the ruins of her own choices. And strangely enough, I didn't hate her. I pitied her. Because people who build identities around appearances eventually lose the ability to recognize love when it arrives quietly. You need help, I said softly. Vanessa stared at me in shock. Not legal help. Not financial help. Real help. Her eyes filled again instantly, but before she could speak, I continued. And Ryan needs to learn the difference between keeping peace and abandoning people. Ryan lowered his head. The truth hurt because it belonged to him. I reached for my coat slowly. Then I said the one thing neither of them expected. I'm changing the locks on the legal ownership access tomorrow. Vanessa's head snapped upward. Ryan looked stunned too, but I raised my hand gently before either could react. Not to punish you, I said quietly. Then I looked directly at my son, to finally protect myself. And for the first time in my entire life as a mother, I realized those two things were not the same. 2 days later, Vanessa finally stopped pretending to be the victim. Until then, she had cycled through every possible version of herself. The apologetic wife, the overwhelmed businesswoman, the misunderstood daughter-in-law, the emotional woman under pressure. But desperation eventually strips performance away, and desperate people become dangerous. It started with a voicemail. I was sitting at my kitchen table early that morning, sorting through old paperwork, when my phone buzzed. Outside, January winds rattled against the windows of my little house, and for the first time in weeks I had finally slept through the night. Then Vanessa's voice shattered the peace. Kelsey, if you keep humiliating us publicly, I swear this will turn ugly. I replayed the message twice, not because I was afraid, because I was stunned by how quickly she had shifted from apology to threat. About an hour later, Claire called. You need to come to my office immediately. Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. What happened? Vanessa retained legal counsel. I almost laughed from disbelief. She's suing me? Not exactly, Claire replied carefully. But her attorney sent a formal notice accusing you of intentionally interfering with financial agreements and damaging business relationships. I sat back slowly in my chair. The audacity nearly impressed me. She publicly threw me out of her home on Christmas Eve. I know. She attempted ownership manipulation. I know. And now I'm the problem, Claire sighed softly. People protecting collapsing lives rarely think rationally. I drove downtown in silence, gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary the entire way. By the time I arrived, Ryan was already sitting in Claire's office. He looked terrible. Again. But this time there was something else in his face too. Disillusionment. The kind that changes people permanently. The moment he saw me, he stood up immediately. Mom. I didn't know she was doing this. I believed him. And honestly, that made everything even sadder. Claire handed me the legal notice. The wording was polished and careful, but the message underneath was clear. Vanessa wanted leverage, pressure, fear, control, just like always. She thinks if she scares you enough, you'll sign the restructuring documents to avoid conflict, Claire explained calmly. I stared at the papers. She still doesn't understand me at all. No, Ryan said bitterly from across the room. She understands manipulation. She just thinks everyone eventually responds to it. Claire folded her hands carefully. There's another issue. My stomach dropped again. What now? She's threatening to claim verbal consent. Ryan looked horrified. What? Claire nodded toward the documents. Her attorney is suggesting Kelsey verbally agreed to future ownership transfer discussions. That's insane, Ryan snapped immediately. Claire looked at him carefully. Did conversations like that ever happen? Ryan hesitated. And suddenly the room became very quiet. My chest tightened. Ryan. He rubbed both hands over his face. Vanessa used to say things like, eventually your mom won't want the responsibility anymore. Chuff. Claire's expression hardened instantly. And how did you respond? He swallowed painfully. I usually said, maybe someday. There it was. Not malicious betrayal, passive permission, the kind weak people give when they want uncomfortable conversations to disappear. Ryan looked physically sick, realizing it too. Oh my God, I stared at him quietly. You never corrected her assumptions. His eyes filled immediately. I didn't think she'd actually push this far, but she had. Because silence creates room for manipulative people to rewrite reality until lies begin sounding reasonable. Claire spoke carefully now. Kelsey, if this escalates legally, we have significant evidence supporting your position. But there's something Vanessa doesn't fully understand. What? Claire slid another folder across the desk. These. I opened it slowly. Email copies. Financial correspondence, investor communication records. Then my pulse slowed. Some of the emails included Vanessa discussing future property plans before obtaining my authorization. One sentence stood out immediately. Once we finalize removing the family complication from ownership liquidation, becomes much cleaner. Family complication. That was me. I looked up slowly. She called me a complication. Ryan looked like someone punched him in the stomach. Claire's voice turned colder. There's more. She handed me another page. This one contained digital timestamp records connected to draft authorization access attempts. Ryan stared at the documents in horror. What does that mean? Claire met his eyes directly. It means someone in Vanessa's office may have attempted preliminary electronic access related to ownership processing before Kelsey gave consent. The room fell silent. Even Ryan understood the implication immediately. This could become criminal, he whispered. Yes. The word hung heavily between us. Ryan stood up abruptly and paced toward the window. No, she wouldn't. But his voice lacked conviction, because deep down he finally saw the truth clearly now. Vanessa's obsession with image had crossed into something darker long before Christmas Eve. Control, desperation, entitlement. Ryan turned back toward us slowly. She told me everything depended on the gala. Claire nodded. That much appears true. I frowned slightly. The gala again. Ryan laughed bitterly. You don't understand how much she tied into that event. He rubbed his eyes tiredly. Investors, social connections, future business deals, donations. He looked at me miserably. She built an entire identity around being successful enough to host those people. And now I ask quietly. Ryan gave a hollow laugh. Now people are calling asking whether we committed fraud. There it was, the collapse, not dramatic, not instant. Just slow public unraveling. Ryan sat back down heavily. I confronted her this morning. I looked at him carefully. What happened? For a moment he couldn't answer. Then finally she admitted she planned to sell the house after the gala. Even though I already suspected it, hearing confirmation still hurt. Ryan continued staring at the floor. She said once the debts were cleared, we could start over somewhere smaller and simpler. I swallowed hard. And where was I supposed to fit into that future? Ryan closed his eyes. She said boundaries with parents were necessary for healthy marriages. No. Isolation was necessary for control. There's a difference. Ryan suddenly looked up at me desperately. Mom. I swear to you I never wanted to erase you. Tears burned behind my eyes again because I believed him. And yet, intentions don't erase consequences. I spoke softly. You didn't need to hate me to hurt me, Ryan. That sentence broke him more than shouting ever could have. He leaned forward with tears in his eyes. What do I do now? The question sounded painfully young, like the little boy who used to ask Ethan how to fix broken toys. Only this time, the broken thing was his entire life. Claire answered before I could. First, you stop protecting behavior that harms people. Ryan nodded slowly. Then he whispered something I never expected to hear. I think my marriage is over. Silence filled the office. Not shocked silence. Sad silence. Because somewhere beneath all the manipulation and lies there had once been love between them, or at least the hope of it. I looked down at my hands quietly. I never wanted that. I know, Ryan whispered. And that was the tragedy of all this. I never wanted revenge. Never wanted humiliation. Never wanted collapse. I just wanted respect. But sometimes when people build their lives on disrespecting others, collapse becomes unavoidable. Claire closed the file carefully, so she said calmly the question now becomes whether we pursue legal action. Ryan looked at me instantly. Fear flashed across his face. Not for himself, for Vanessa. And in that moment, despite everything, I realized something important. My son still loved her. Broken marriages don't stop loving overnight. I sat quietly for a long moment before finally answering. No. Both Ryan and Claire looked surprised. I folded my hands slowly in my lap. I'm not ready to destroy someone's life. Relief flooded Ryan's face instantly, but I raised my hand gently. That doesn't mean there won't be consequences. And for the first time since Christmas Eve, I finally knew exactly what those consequences needed to be. 3 days later, I sat across from Vanessa Cooper in Claire Bennett's conference room, and for the first time since Christmas Eve, there was no audience, no investors, no elegant dinner guests, no performance, just truth sitting heavily between us. Vanessa looked exhausted. Not glamorous exhausted, not fashionably stressed. Real exhaustion. Her makeup barely covered the dark circles beneath her eyes, and her hands shook slightly each time she reached for her water glass. Ryan sat beside her silently, not touching her. That detail hurt both of them more than words probably could. Claire organized several documents neatly across the table before speaking. Kelsey has decided not to pursue immediate legal action, she said calmly. Relief flooded Vanessa's face so fast it was almost painful to watch. Oh, thank God. But Claire continued immediately. That decision comes with conditions. The relief vanished. Vanessa straightened slowly. What conditions? I looked directly at her. Not with anger anymore. Just clarity. For once in your life, I said quietly, I want you to stop managing appearances and start telling the truth. Silence settled across the room. Vanessa folded her arms defensively. What exactly does that mean? It means, I replied calmly, you publicly correct the lies about the house? Her jaw tightened instantly. All of them. Ryan stared down at the table. I continued. You tell your investors, donors, and business partners the truth about the ownership structure. Vanessa's eyes widened slightly. That would destroy my reputation. I almost laughed. Vanessa, your reputation is already collapsing. Honesty is the only thing that might save what's left. She looked away immediately. Claire slid another paper forward. Second, she said professionally, all unauthorized refinancing and liquidation discussions regarding the property stop immediately. Vanessa swallowed hard. And third, this time I answered softly, you move out of the house temporarily. Ryan's head lifted sharply. Vanessa looked stunned. What? I held her gaze calmly. You and Ryan need distance from the environment where all of this became normal. That's ridiculous. No, I replied quietly. What happened on Christmas Eve was ridiculous. She opened her mouth again, but Ryan spoke first. She's right. Vanessa turned toward him in disbelief. You can't seriously agree with this. Ryan looked exhausted beyond words. I don't even recognize our life anymore, Vanessa. That sentence hit harder than shouting, because it carried grief instead of anger. Vanessa stared at him silently for several seconds. Then she whispered, You're choosing her over me. Ryan closed his eyes briefly. No, he said softly. I'm finally choosing reality. Silence, heavy and painful. I looked down at my hands. I hadn't come there to destroy their marriage. But truth changes relationships whether we intend it to or not. Claire continued carefully. There's one more condition. Vanessa laughed bitterly. Of course there is. I looked at Ryan now. You need counseling? He blinked. What, you heard me? Ryan rubbed his forehead tiredly. Mom, you spent years avoiding conflict so badly that you allowed people you loved to hurt each other while you stayed silent. His face crumpled slightly. That isn't kindness, Ryan. It's fear. The truth hurt him because he already knew it. I softened my voice. Your father taught you better than this. At Ethan's mention, Ryan looked down immediately. That grief still lived inside both of us. Sometimes I think widows and sons mourn differently, but carry the same wound forever. Ryan nodded slowly. Okay. Vanessa stared at him again. You're seriously agreeing to all this. Ryan looked at her with heartbreaking exhaustion. I'm tired, Vanessa. Not angry. Tired. Honestly, that seemed to frighten her more, because anger still contains energy. Exhaustion means something deeper has broken. Vanessa stood suddenly and walked toward the conference room window. Snow drifted softly outside downtown Columbus while silence filled the room behind her. Finally, she spoke quietly. I grew up terrified of being poor. The confession surprised all of us. Even Claire looked up. Vanessa kept staring out the window. My father lost everything when I was 13, she continued. We lost our house. My mother worked nights. Kids at school treated us differently overnight. Barbara and Stephen had mentioned financial struggles before, but never like this. Vanessa's voice trembled slightly now. I promised myself I'd never live like that again. I listened quietly. For years, she whispered, I thought if I looked successful enough, eventually I'd feel safe. There it was. The truth underneath all the cruelty. Fear, not excuse, not justification, but truth. I spoke gently. And somewhere along the way, you started believing people mattered less than the image. Tears filled her eyes instantly. Yes. The honesty in that single word broke something open inside the room. Ryan looked devastated hearing it. Because suddenly none of this felt simple anymore. Not villains, not heroes, just wounded people making destructive choices. Vanessa finally turned back toward me. I know you think I hate you. I met her eyes calmly, didn't you? She shook her head slowly. No. Her voice cracked. I hated what you represented. I frowned slightly. What does that mean? You made Ryan feel safe being vulnerable. Tears slid down her cheeks now, and every time he turned to you emotionally, I felt like I was losing control of our future. The statement revealed more than she intended. Love mixed with fear becomes control very quickly. Ryan looked heartbroken. Vanessa. But she kept talking now, like years of buried emotion were finally spilling free. You were always calm, Kelsey, always steady. Ryan trusted you completely. She laughed weakly through tears. I think part of me became jealous of that. I sat quietly absorbing the confession. Then I asked softly, "So humiliating me made you feel powerful?" Her face collapsed. No. But yes, we all knew it. Vanessa sank slowly back into her chair. I don't know how I became this person. That sentence lingered heavily between us, because honestly, neither did I. Claire finally cleared her throat gently. So, are we agreeing to the conditions? Ryan answered immediately. Yes. All eyes turned toward Vanessa. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then finally, yes. The word sounded like surrender. Not legal surrender, emotional surrender. The exhausting kind that happens when someone can no longer maintain the illusion they built around themselves. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I just felt sad. Sad for Ryan, sad for myself, even sad for Vanessa, because damaged people often spend years hurting others while desperately trying to avoid their own pain. After the meeting ended, Ryan walked me downstairs to the parking garage. Snowflakes drifted softly through the cold evening air. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he asked quietly, "Are you coming back to the house?" I looked at him carefully. No. His expression fell immediately. Why I stared out at the snowy city? Because I finally realized something important. What that house stopped feeling like home a long time ago. Ryan's eyes filled again. I can fix that. I shook my head gently. No, sweetheart. My voice softened painfully. Some places become too connected to hurt. He looked devastated. And God help me, part of me wanted to comfort him immediately like I always had. But this time I didn't rush to erase consequences. Instead, I touched his cheek softly. "I love you," I whispered. His face crumpled instantly. "I love you too, Mom." And for the first time in many years, those words finally felt honest again. Not perfect, not healed, but honest. Sometimes that's where healing begins. 3 months later, I moved into a little cottage near Lake Michigan. If someone had told me a year earlier that I would willingly leave the house I helped build for my son, I would have thought they were crazy. But grief changes your definition of home, and so does peace. The cottage sat just outside a small lakeside town in western Michigan. Nothing fancy, white wooden walls, a stone fireplace, tiny back porch facing the water. But the first morning I woke up there, I heard waves instead of tension. And for the first time in years, my chest didn't feel heavy. I spent my first week unpacking slowly. Not because I had many things, because I was learning how to live without constantly preparing myself emotionally for disappointment. That realization alone nearly made me cry. One afternoon, while organizing kitchen cabinets, I found Ethan's old coffee mug wrapped carefully in newspaper. World's okayest golfer. I laughed so suddenly I startled myself. Then without warning I burst into tears. Not sad tears this time. Release. There's a difference. Grief trapped inside your body for too long eventually needs somewhere to go. I sat on the kitchen floor, holding Ethan's mug while sunlight spilled through the cottage windows, and I realized something painful for years. I had built my entire emotional life around being needed. Needed by Ryan, needed by family, needed by everyone except myself. I didn't know who I was without sacrifice. That frightened me, but it also felt strangely freeing. About 2 weeks after moving in, I met Mia Reynolds. She lived 3 cottages down from mine and introduced herself by bringing over blueberry muffins and criticizing my bird feeder placement within the first 5 minutes. "You're attracting squirrels instead of cardinals," she announced confidently. I stared at her, then laughed harder than I had in months. Mia was 71, widowed twice, brutally honest and completely uninterested in pretending life was prettier than it really was. We became friends almost immediately. One cold afternoon, while we drank tea overlooking the frozen lake, Mia asked the question everyone else avoided. "So what actually happened with your son?" I hesitated. Then I told her. Not every legal detail, just the emotional truth, the humiliation, the silence, the betrayal. Mia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she sighed deeply. "Women our age were taught to disappear gracefully," she said. I looked at her quietly. What do you mean? We were taught that good mothers sacrifice until there's nothing left of themselves. She stirred her tea slowly, and when people start taking us for granted, we're supposed to call it love. That sentence settled heavily inside me, because she was right. How many women spent decades shrinking themselves to maintain family peace? How many mothers convinced themselves disrespect was normal because loneliness felt scarier? Mia looked at me carefully. You know what saved you? What you finally got angry enough to stop abandoning yourself? I stared out at the lake for a long time after that, because I think she might have been right. Around that same time, I started volunteering twice a week at a local senior resource center downtown. At first, I only intended to help organize donations and paperwork. Then one afternoon, I met a woman named Eleanor. She was 76 and quietly terrified because her grandson had convinced her to co-sign loans she barely understood. Now collection agencies were calling daily and she was too ashamed to tell anyone. Listening to her story made something click painfully inside me. This wasn't rare, it was happening everywhere. Older women manipulated emotionally because family knew exactly which buttons to push guilt, fear, love, loneliness. After that, I began helping more regularly. Nothing dramatic, just listening. Helping people review paperwork. Encouraging women to ask questions before signing documents. And oddly enough, helping them began healing me too. Because every time I told another woman she deserved respect, I slowly started believing it about myself. Ryan started visiting about once a month. The first visit was awkward. He arrived carrying groceries and looking nervous enough to throw up. I didn't know what kind of coffee you buy now, he admitted awkwardly while unpacking bags. Now. Such a small word. But it acknowledged something important. My life no longer revolved around him. And strangely enough, that seemed healthy for both of us. We sat on the porch overlooking the lake while cold spring wind moved across the water. For a while, we just talked about ordinary things. The weather, the town, the birds Mia kept yelling about. Then eventually Ryan spoke quietly. Vanessa moved into an apartment downtown. I nodded once. How is she? He looked surprised by the question. Honestly, yes. Ryan stared out at the lake. She's struggling. I felt sad hearing that. Not satisfied. Sad. Because despite everything, I never truly wanted Vanessa destroyed. I just wanted the cruelty to stop. Ryan rubbed his hands together nervously. She started therapy. That surprised me. She did. Yeah. He gave a weak smile. Apparently, her therapist told her she built her whole identity around controlling uncertainty. That sounded painfully accurate. Ryan sighed heavily. I'm in therapy too. I looked at him carefully. And he laughed quietly. It turns out conflict avoidance is not a healthy personality trait. I smiled despite myself. No, it's not. For a moment, we both sat silently listening to waves. Then Ryan looked at me with tears gathering slowly in his eyes. I miss Dad. The confession hit me hard because grief still connected us more honestly than almost anything else. I do too, I whispered. Ryan wiped his face roughly. The therapist asked me why I stayed silent Christmas Eve. I stayed very still. What did you tell him? He swallowed painfully. That I spent my whole marriage trying to prevent explosions. I closed my eyes briefly. And eventually I started sacrificing smaller truths to avoid bigger fights. There it was. The entire tragedy of our family in one sentence. Ryan looked devastated. I didn't realize silence could become betrayal. I reached over slowly and squeezed his hand. Most people don't realize it until after someone gets hurt. Tears slid quietly down his face. I'm trying to change, and for the first time in a very long while, I believed him. Not because he promised beautifully, because he had stopped performing entirely. That's how real change begins. Quietly. Without audience, without applause. Before leaving that evening, Ryan stood awkwardly beside his car. Then he looked at the cottage behind me. You seem happier here. I turned toward the lake, toward the little white house, toward the peaceful silence, toward the life I never realized I deserved too. Yes, I answered honestly. And maybe the biggest surprise of all was this. For the first time in decades, my happiness no longer depended on whether someone else made space for me. I finally made space for myself. The next Christmas arrived quietly. Not with drama, not with expensive parties, not with strangers holding champagne glasses in a perfectly decorated house. Just quietly. Lake Michigan had frozen along the shoreline again, and soft snow covered the roofs of the little cottages around mine. I spent most mornings wrapped in blankets near the fireplace reading novels Mia insisted I was emotionally mature enough to finally appreciate. According to her, widows should either become fearless or eccentric, preferably both. On December 23rd, Ryan called. I stared at his name on my phone for several seconds before answering. "Hi, sweetheart." The word came naturally now again. Not forced, not painful, just true. "Hi, Mom." His voice sounded calmer these days. Not perfect, but steadier. "How are you nervous?" he admitted honestly. That made me smile a little. At least therapy is working. He laughed softly. Apparently, honesty is cheaper than denial in the long run. I leaned back in my chair beside the fire. "That may be the wisest thing you've said in years." Silence settled comfortably between us. Then he cleared his throat. "I wanted to ask you something." "Okay, I was wondering if—" He hesitated. "If maybe you'd come for Christmas dinner tomorrow." My chest tightened slightly. Not from fear exactly. Memory. Because some invitations carry ghosts inside them. Ryan spoke again quickly. "No pressure, Mom." "Seriously, you can say no." I looked out the window at falling snow. What changed? He was quiet for a second. Then, me. The honesty of that answer hurt and healed me at the same time. "I sold the house," he added softly. "That surprised me." "You did?" "Yeah." I sat up straighter. "What about the debt?" "I downsized everything." He laughed weakly. "Turns out I don't actually need a 12-foot Christmas tree or imported marble countertops to survive." I smiled despite myself. "What kind of place do you have now?" "A small townhouse outside Columbus." His voice softened. "It's quiet. Quiet." That word mattered more to me now than luxury ever could. Ryan hesitated again. "There's something else." "Would I set a place for Dad?" Tears instantly filled my eyes. Not dramatic tears. The deep kind older people cry silently because grief has become part of their bloodstream. "You did." "Yeah." His voice cracked slightly. I realized last Christmas was the first Christmas I'd ever spent dishonoring everything he taught me. That sentence nearly broke me, because Ethan Cooper would have hated what our family became during those years. Not the money problems. Not the struggle, the pride, the performance, the silence. Ethan believed dignity mattered more than appearances. Always. I closed my eyes briefly. "I'll come," I whispered. Ryan exhaled shakily. "Thank you." But before we hung up, he added something unexpected. "And Mom?" "Yes. You can leave any time you want." I frowned slightly. "What do you mean I mean?" He swallowed hard. "I never want you feeling trapped or unwelcome around me again. If you're uncomfortable for even 1 second, you leave. No guilt, no pressure." That was when I realized something profound. My son had finally learned the difference between inviting someone into your home and feeling entitled to their presence. Christmas Eve arrived cold and beautiful. I wore a simple navy sweater and brought a pecan pie. Of course I did. Some traditions survive even heartbreak. When I pulled into Ryan's driveway the next evening, I froze for a moment staring at the townhouse. Small, simple, warm light glowing through the windows. No luxury cars, no extravagant decorations, no performance. It looked peaceful. Ryan opened the door before I even knocked. For a second, we just looked at each other. Then he smiled softly. "Merry Christmas, Mom." And this time, he sounded like my son again. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and roasted turkey. Soft jazz played quietly in the background, and a modest Christmas tree glowed near the fireplace. No audience, no investors, just family. Ryan took my coat carefully. "You look beautiful." The words hit me unexpectedly hard, because respect often returns first in small moments. I looked around slowly. Then I saw it. An empty chair at the dinner table. Beside it sat Ethan's old plaid coffee mug, world's okayest golfer. My hand flew to my mouth instantly. Ryan looked emotional too. I found it packed in one of the storage boxes. He said quietly, "I thought maybe Dad deserved to be here this year." Tears blurred my vision completely. Not because the gesture was perfect, because it was sincere. And sincerity heals things performance never can. We ate dinner slowly that night. Turkey, mashed potatoes, pie, simple food, honest conversation. At one point, Ryan laughed while telling me about accidentally shrinking all his sweaters in the dryer after moving into the townhouse alone. "You never realized how much Vanessa handled, did you?" I asked gently. His smile faded slightly. No. He looked down at his plate. I also didn't realize how much pressure she was carrying either. That surprised me, even now after everything he spoke about her with compassion, not bitterness. Growth often sounds like that. What happened between you two? I asked carefully. Ryan stared quietly at the candle flickering between us. We separated officially in September. I nodded slowly. Are you okay? He thought about the question honestly. Some days, yes. Some days, no. Fair answer. He sighed softly. She's still in therapy. And you? He smiled weakly. Apparently, I have lifetime membership now. I laughed quietly. Then Ryan grew serious again. She asked about you recently. I looked up. What did you say that you're doing well? He hesitated. And that you finally stopped apologizing for existing? That sentence settled deeply into my chest. Because he understood now. Finally. The entire wound had never truly been about money or property. It was about dignity. Later that evening, we sat near the fireplace drinking coffee while snow fell softly outside. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Ryan looked at me carefully. Do you think Dad would forgive me? The question sounded painfully small, like the little boy who once cried because he accidentally broke Ethan's fishing rod. I reached over and squeezed his hand gently. Your father loved you more than his own life. Ryan's eyes filled instantly. But would he be disappointed? I answered honestly. Yes. Ryan nodded slowly. Then I continued softly. But disappointment and love are not opposites. That broke him completely. He cried quietly beside the fire while I held his hand the same way I used to when he was little and scared of thunderstorms. Only now we both understood something we hadn't before. Love without accountability becomes weakness, but accountability without love becomes cruelty. Healing requires both. Before I left that night, Ryan walked me to my car through falling snow. Then he hugged me tightly. Not distracted, not rushed. Present. I'm still learning, he whispered. I know. And Mom. Yes. There will always be a place for you with me. I looked at my son standing beneath Christmas lights glowing softly against the snow. Then I smiled gently. I know that now, too. A year and a half after the Christmas Eve that changed everything, I hosted my own Christmas dinner at the cottage by Lake Michigan. Not because I needed to prove anything, not because I wanted revenge, simply because for the first time in my life, I understood something deeply important. Home is not the place where people tolerate you. Home is the place where your heart feels safe being fully seen. The cottage looked beautiful that night. Snow covered the frozen shoreline outside, and soft golden light glowed through the windows, while jazz music drifted quietly through the living room. Mia helped decorate the tree earlier that week, while loudly criticizing my ornament organization skills. You hang decorations like someone still trying to emotionally impress dead relatives, she informed me. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped a glass ornament. That laugh would have surprised the woman I used to be, the woman who once believed aging meant becoming smaller and quieter to keep everyone comfortable. I wasn't that woman anymore. Around 5 o'clock, Ryan arrived carrying a tray of homemade rolls. Homemade. That alone nearly made me emotional. He stepped inside, smiling nervously. I burned the first batch, he admitted immediately. Good Mia called from the kitchen. Suffering builds character. Ryan laughed softly. The sound warmed something deep inside me. Not because everything was magically healed, because healing had become real enough to include laughter again. Ryan looked healthier these days. Therapy, simpler living, and finally abandoning the exhausting performance of success had changed him. There was still sadness in him sometimes, especially when conversations drifted toward Vanessa, but the frantic pressure he once carried constantly had faded. He looked more like Ethan now, not physically, spiritually, present, grounded, honest. As we prepared dinner together, Ryan suddenly spoke quietly beside the stove. I talked to Vanessa last week. I glanced up carefully. Oh, he nodded slowly. She moved to Chicago. I stirred the gravy gently. How is she doing? Ryan thought about it before answering. Better, I think. I noticed he no longer rushed to protect her image either. That mattered. She's working for a nonprofit now, he added softly. Helping women with financial recovery programs? That surprised me deeply. Really? Yeah. A small silence settled between us. Then Ryan smiled faintly. She said you were probably right about her long before she was. I looked down at the counter quietly. That sentence carried more sadness than victory. Because honestly, I never wanted to be right. I would have preferred a peaceful family over moral vindication any day. Ryan leaned against the counter. She asked me to tell you something. I raised an eyebrow slightly. What? His expression softened. She said, he hesitated. Tell your mother I'm sorry I confused control with strength. The kitchen became very still. I closed my eyes briefly. And unexpectedly tears gathered there again. Not angry tears. Mourning tears. Because somewhere beneath all the damage I finally saw Vanessa clearly too. A frightened little girl who grew into a woman convinced love could disappear at any moment if she stopped controlling everything around her. Fear ruins people that way sometimes. It teaches them to grip so tightly they accidentally crush the very relationships they're trying to protect. Mia entered the kitchen carrying wine glasses. Well, she announced dramatically, if everyone's done emotionally processing their trauma for 5 minutes, dinner's ready. Ryan burst out laughing, and honestly, so did I. We ate around the little oak dining table beside the fireplace, while snow drifted outside the windows. No luxury decorations, no investors, no pressure, just warmth. Real warmth. At one point during dinner, Ryan looked around the cottage quietly. You know, he said softly, this feels more like Christmas than that giant house ever did. I smiled gently, because nobody here is performing. He nodded slowly. Then his eyes drifted toward Ethan's old coffee mug sitting beside the fireplace. World's okayest golfer. Ryan's voice lowered. I spent so many years trying to become successful enough to feel worthy. My chest tightened slightly. Your father already thought you were worthy. Ryan looked down immediately. I know that now, and maybe that was the real tragedy behind everything that happened. Not greed, not property, not humiliation, fear of unworthiness. Vanessa feared being poor, Ryan feared being weak, and I feared being abandoned. Those fears collided until they nearly destroyed all of us. But fear only loses power once it's spoken honestly out loud. After dinner, Ryan helped me wash dishes while Mia fell asleep in the armchair, pretending she was resting her eyes strategically. The kitchen windows fogged from warm water and winter cold outside. Ryan handed me another plate quietly. Can I ask you something, of course? Do you fully forgive me? The question deserved honesty. So I gave it. I forgive you, I said softly. But forgiveness doesn't erase memory. He nodded slowly. I understand. And honestly, I continued gently, that's probably healthy. Ryan looked at me carefully. What do you mean? I dried my hands slowly on a kitchen towel. I spent too many years believing love meant having no boundaries. I met his eyes softly. Now I think real love requires them. Ryan absorbed that quietly. Then he whispered, I'm proud of you, Mom. The words hit harder than he probably realized. Because older mothers spend so much of life being proud of everyone else that we rarely imagine someone feeling proud of us. I smiled through sudden tears. Thank you. Later that night, after Ryan left and Mia finally went home muttering complaints about emotionally exhausting holiday dinners, I stood alone on the cottage porch, wrapped in a thick blanket. Snowflakes drifted softly across the frozen lake while distant lights flickered along the shoreline. Everything was quiet, peacefully quiet. I thought back to that terrible Christmas Eve when Vanessa looked me in the eyes and said, There's no place for you here. At the time, those words nearly destroyed me. Now I finally understood something she never did. My worth was never dependent on someone else making room for me. Not my son, not my daughter-in-law, not society, not family. Because people who truly love you do not merely allow your presence. They honor it. And if they don't, you build a life where your spirit can breathe anyway. I looked out across the frozen water and smiled softly into the winter night. For the first time in many years, I no longer feared loneliness, because I'd finally come home to myself. After everything that happened, I learned something I wish more women, especially mothers, understood earlier in life. Love should never require you to disappear. For years, I believed being a good mother meant sacrificing quietly, forgiving endlessly, and accepting whatever treatment kept the family together. I thought endurance was the same thing as love. I thought silence made me strong. But silence can slowly teach people to underestimate your pain. And when you spend too long making yourself smaller for others, eventually they stop seeing you altogether. What happened between me, Ryan, and Vanessa was never truly about money or a house. It was about fear, insecurity, pride, and the dangerous ways families sometimes avoid honest conversations until resentment grows into cruelty. Ryan feared failure. Vanessa feared instability. And I feared losing the people I loved. Fear shaped all of us. But healing only began when truth entered the room. Not perfect truth, not comfortable truth, honest truth. I also learned that forgiveness and boundaries can exist together. You can love someone deeply and still refuse to let them mistreat you. You can forgive without returning to the version of yourself that tolerated disrespect. That lesson changed my life. And maybe that's the message I hope stays with you after hearing my story. There is no age limit on reclaiming your dignity. You are never too old to build peace, never too old to start over, never too old to stop apologizing for taking up emotional space in your own family. If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments. Have you ever felt invisible inside your own family? And what do you think hurts more, cruel words or painful silence? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who may need the reminder that their worth does not disappear simply because others fail to appreciate it. And wherever you are tonight, I hope you remember this: there is always a place for you in this world.